It's May 30th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, you have a 5 alarm fire that could grab boxing's attention over the next year. Right? Just understand this will be a slow burning one. 147 pounds, right? An old man. And when you're 46, you are an old man at 147 pounds, right? Manny Pacquiao is returning to the sport. He may have picked the right time, right? According to reports, Jaron Ennis is having a problem making weight. Now, I need for folks to understand that there comes a time when your body goes on strike, right? History is replete with guys who struggle to make weight who then end up losing punch resistance, right? Some, after particularly bad weight cuts, have gotten badly hurt in the ring. Remember Gerald McClellan, right? McClellan's just one of a number of fighters who got badly hurt in the ring after losing a lot of weight to make weight. So the fact that Jaron Ennis might be able to get by a weigh-in doesn't necessarily mean he'd be able to deal with significant punching power like a Manny Pacquiao brings to the table. Also, you need to be careful here. When you have a cultural icon, that's what he is. I'm sure Manny Pacquiao has a hard time, not getting VIP treatment in the Philippines. When a cultural icon, suddenly returns to the sport, right? Many times he sees some things. Many times he looks at the guys ruling the roost and he realizes, wow, there are problems, right? As I've mentioned here in the past, Jaron Ennis has been getting hit in fights. His defense, for whatever reason, is not what it once was. Right? Another guy getting hit in fights is Mario Barrios, Manny Pacquiao's next opponent. Let me make a point here too. You talk with fans, and of course, many of us would love to have a true champion. Right? Would love to look at a division and say, who's the champ? It's Alexander Usyk, right? Because the other guy has already lost to Usyk, right? We like definitive champions. But let me just say, the situation at 147 right now is a great example as to why many people prefer multiple champions, right? The market will pick the best in the division. In other words, we can look at 147. I think most people would say Jaron Ennis is the best at 147. Right? And I'm not counting Terrence Crawford, who I understand is still a champion in recess for one of these sanctioning bodies. But the market knows when it looks at a division who the real champion is, right? Most of the time. Sometimes the market gets it right, sometimes the market gets it wrong. Right? But the market tends to have a pecking order, right? Cruiserweight. Let's face it. There's a Gilberto Ramirez crowd out there. Let's face it. There's a Jay Opataya crowd out there. A fight between the two would be tremendous. But I think the market feels that Jay Opataya is the man at cruiserweight. Right? At 175, we understand David Benavidez is there. We understand Benavidez is still unbeaten. But Benavidez hasn't fought Beterbiev like Dimitri Bivol has. Right? Beterbiev, of course, beat Callum Smith, beat Anthony Yard. In other words, Beterbiev has already beaten some of the major contenders. So I would argue that in the public's mind, rightly or wrongly, The man at 175 is Dimitri Bivol, right? I understand. The majority of crowd will say, hey, not so fast. Those guys fought twice. Our guy won one of the two. But you and I know that's not the way boxing works. It's a what have you done for me lately fight. That matters the most, right? It's the guy who wins the last fight who wears the crown. Beterbiev is not the champion at 175. It's the man who beat him, Dimitri Bivol. But at 147, just understand, it's because you have multiple champions that a box office king, a Hall of Famer, a former fighter, Manny Pacquiao, is able to return to the sport and is able to pick the guy he wants to fight. There's not one guy who can shut him out. He can come back and he can say, you know what? Whether Jaron Ennis wants to fight me or not, there's another champ here who wants to fight me. Mario Barrios. Right? I'm going to fight him. Let's talk about the other champ, Brian Norman, who looks extremely promising. But Brian Norman hasn't been in the ring with Gervonta Davis like Mario Barrios has. Right? He hasn't been in the ring with the guys who Jaron Ennis has been in the ring with. So the multiple champion setup allows a young champion who's still trying to get lines on his resume, who might realize that he might not be ready right now. My words, not his words, not his camp's words, but he might not be ready right now to fight a Jaron Ennis. Right? So, of course, multiple champions allows an unbeaten Brian Norman, who has a great left hook, to have a share of the championship. Right? So, let's talk about a fight that didn't happen at 147 because it matters. Right? Teofimo Lopez, who is now hanging out at 147, believe it or not, was scheduled to fight at a catch weight. Granted, they were going to do it at 145. Devin Haney on a Riyadh card. Now, there are times in boxing where you think these fighters are all adults, that they're all seasoned, that they've been in the public consciousness for years. Then there are other times when you realize that these are young guys. Right? Some of them are young guys. Some of them really, need to have a certain image in social media. Right? They don't understand the way the world works. They don't understand the power dynamics. They don't understand when they don't have any power in the room. Right? Just understand that one of the rules of life is that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Right? If you start biting the hand that feeds you, then it's time to leave the room and to go find some other dynamic to support yourself, whether that's self-employment, whether that's finding a different hand that's feeding you, whatever. Well, of course, somehow Teofimo Lopez did not get the memo. He had a big fight in front of him, right? Let's be real here. Devin Haney did not look that inspiring in his last fight against Jose Ramirez, right? I did think Ramirez would do better than he did, but Devin Haney, at this point of his career, seems to be a runner, right? He has the same problem that Shakur Stevenson has. When you have a big reputation, you have to find a way to have moments in the fight when you engage, right? It can't be a fight where you're winning rounds, but fans are bored out of their shoes by the fifth round, right? But just understand, Devin Haney, and I would have if I made a video on that Teofimo Lopez Devin Haney fight, I would have picked Haney to win the fight because I feel Teofimo, new weight class, and has a problem with movement. Right? But just understand, I never got a chance to make that video. The fight's not going to happen because Teofimo went online in a sport of scarcity. In other words, a sport where many fighters would love to be on a Riyadh card. Right? Many fighters would love the opportunity to fight Devin Haney. In a sport of scarcity, Teofimo Lopez on social media decided he was going to bash the promoters. Why would you do that? Right? Maybe there's some teenager out there who's impressed by Teofimo, showing them that he's the man on social media. Right? For people actually interested in actual fights, in actually getting opportunities, in watching real fights. Right? Teofimo came across like a buffoon. Right? So, of course, the promoter had a lot of options. Teofimo was just one of them. Right? There are other guys who Devin Haney can draw a crowd with. Right? The fact that Haney doesn't have a belt at 147 shows you that there are 3 champions at 147 who he could, draw a crowd with. Understand, news that Manny Pacquiao is coming to the division opens the door for that fight, which would be a blockbuster fight. Pacquiao, right, much more offensively blessed than Teofimo Lopez, but a 46-year-old who would be in the ring chasing a rabbit. Right? And Devin Haney. Haney has a lot of paths for the future. A lot of them. Teofimo was just one option. Teofimo didn't seem to understand that being a 140 guy coming up to 147, not having a, belt, didn't make him indispensable. Well, he found out he's dispensable. The Riyadh promoters, Turki Al-Sheikh, has moved off of Teofimo Lopez. Right? The way getting older works is you end up in your, 40s or 50s or 60s. You look back and then you think, man, was I foolish at that age? You look back, even the things that worked out. You look back and you're thinking, man, how did I take that risk? Right? Wow, how did I make that move? What was I thinking then? Right? Of course, in the moment, Teofimo is going to feel that he made the right decision, throwing away millions of dollars and a possible career-defining fight to look like big man on campus on social media. Right? Years from now, he'll be honest with himself. Right? He'll, think to himself, wow, I could have fought Devin Haney in 2025. I could have put myself in the Manny Pacquiao sweepstakes. I could have put myself in the sweepstakes for a title shot. Instead, I was big man on social media for 5 minutes. Right? Let me just say, Pacquiao has really a shocking opportunity here. And it's absolutely shocking. If he beats Mario Barrios, right, and Barrios leans over the pocket, Barrios gets hit. Barrios likes to be in firefights. Right? Just, Barrios is high risk. Right? If Pacquiao gets by Barrios, he'll have a title at 147. Right? His next move could be major. Right? You have another box office cow. Granted, he looked uninspired in his last fight, but you have Ryan Garcia out there. If you're going to fight Garcia, now's the time to fight him. Right? There's this whole PED cloud. He'd be risking too much taking PEDs now. Right? There's him looking like he fell too in love with his left hook Forgot about defense, forgot about the fact that boxing is a craft, it's a nuanced sport. You can't let Raleigh Romero double up on his own left hooks against you. You actually have to do something to win a fight. You can't just stand in front of Raleigh Romero and not ever put your foot on the gas to make it a fight. Um, you know, Ryan Garcia looks out of sorts. The ring rust of being suspended for a year shows. If Manny Pacquiao announced that he's fighting Ryan Garcia, folks, that's cash cow against cash cow. How much money would Pacquiao get? Right? Understand, if Pacquiao, who has a big punch, who's fast, who's hard to find, he's short, he knows how to bob and weave. If he fights Jaron Ennis and lands on Ennis like Stanionis landed on Ennis, is Ennis still upright? Right? Would Ennis be able to cut weight and still keep his punch resistance? That's unclear. Right? Brian Norman looks promising to me. Brian Norman hasn't fought anybody approaching the level of Manny Pacquiao, even now. Right? Because Pacquiao, while he looks sluggish in one of these, celebrity type fights, understand power's the last to go. Pacquiao's elusive. Pacquiao's a southpaw. Right? It's complicated. Right? Norman would have to show some negative energy skills that Juan Manuel Marquez showed, that your Dennis Ugas showed. Right? I haven't seen Norman do that in a fight. Right? So 147 has just turned into a party. Let me say this too. Gervonta Davis is fighting Lamont Roach. I think that's a mistake. The rumor is that he's then going to fight Jake Paul. Who knows how they're going to make that work weight-wise. Right? If I'm Gervonta Davis, who's already been a champion in more than one weight class, why wouldn't I want to fight Manny Pacquiao, boxing legend? Right? That's a May-December match. Gervonta Davis might feel that Pacquiao is too old. Right? Davis is explosive himself, carries his own power. Of all of Davis's opponents, Manny Pacquiao would stand out quite a bit, even though Davis has had, fights against, Jose Pedraza, for example. Right? He's fought quality guys in the past. Right? But this fight would really stand out. And, of course, it would pay him a hell of a lot more than the paychecks he would get from some of the other fights. Who cares? Seriously. If a sanctioning body strips Gervonta Davis of its title. Davis, as I make this video, is still unbeaten. Right? Does the title make the man, or does the man make the title? I think Davis is big enough. He's a cash cow fighter. I think he's big enough where he's really making a lot of these titles. Right? So, it's professional prize fighting. If Manny Pacquiao brings with him a lot of eyeballs, right, like Mike Tyson did for Jake Paul, a lot of eyeballs, a lot of money, a lot of attention, a lot of focus, right, Davis has to ask himself, am I going to pass up this payday? Right? Pacquiao at this stage is playing with house money. He doesn't have to beat any of these current guys, to have a great legend, right? There are film clips of him fighting, Juan Manuel Marquez, Oscar De La Hoya, Ricky Hatton, right? He has a long list of big victories that he had across several different weight classes, right? He beat Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman looked awfully good at 154, right? That's another possible fight for Pacquiao. Pacquiao against Thurman. Although Thurman might be a little big for Pacquiao right now, right? But, My point is, if you're a Gervonta Davis, can you say no to Manny Pacquiao? Right? I wouldn't. If you're the business manager for those guys, you have to say, gee, player, where are we going to get the views that we would get with Manny Pacquiao? Right? 5 years from now, let's say Gervonta Davis becomes part of the Pacquiao story. He fights Pacquiao. It's a dramatic fight. Let's say it's one of these fights where both guys have their moments. Both guys hit the canvas, or both guys get dazed and confused. It's a shootout. It's a classic. I'm just telling you, when even great fighters retire, right? Great fighters with long resumes, you remember 3 or 4 fights, don't you? Right? They might not even be the hardest fights the guy had. Right? Joe Calzaghe had some tough fights. Robin Reed, that's a tough fight. But you think Joe Calzaghe, and you're thinking, Calzaghe, Roy Jones. Calzaghe, Bernard Hopkins. Calzaghe, Mikkel Kessler. Aren't those the names? Isn't that, Ray Leonard? You think of him, you think of Wilfredo Benitez. You think of Roberto Duran. You think of Thomas the Hitman Hearns. You think of Marvin Hagler. Right? Manny Pacquiao is such a big name that if I'm legacy minded and if I'm Gervonta Davis, I'm thinking, look, when I retire, they're going to think of, the 3 or 4 most interesting opponents I fought. Right? For Mayweather, as you can imagine, Oscar De La Hoya, Manny Pacquiao, Canelo, right? Aren't those the big names that you think of? With Floyd, right? We'll overlook the fact that Floyd also fought Diego Corrales, right? He also fought Juan Manuel Marquez, right? But you're thinking of the big names, right? That's how we do things. Manny Pacquiao is such a big name that if you're Gervonta Davis, granted, there are other guys out there who are deserving of shots of the title, right? I'm not disputing that. The winner of Zepeda, Stevenson, they're deserving of a shot at the title, right? But you and I know neither has the name of Manny Pacquiao, because neither, like Pacquiao, has fought El Terrible, has fought Floyd Mayweather, right? Has fought the guys Pacquiao has fought, has won the number of titles Pacquiao has won, has recently fought and beaten, recently for Pacquiao, Keith Thurman. Right? There's so many scalps on Pacquiao's resume that we forget that he's the only guy to beat Keith Thurman. So Manny Pacquiao is back, folks. He's bringing millions of fans with him. I know we're all focused on Canelo, Terence Crawford. Fair enough, right? Style-wise, this Pacquiao-Barrios fight is going to be a barn burner, right? You just hope there isn't something wrong with Pacquiao that you don't know about. That Pacquiao doesn't show the lack of movement that Mike Tyson showed against Jake Paul. If Manny Pacquiao, who had great legs, if Manny Pacquiao still has the legs and still has the power, and has been in the gym and still has the timing, this is a major moment, folks, for 147 pounds. Don't overlook it. While there are many fights out there this summer, this fight should be on your very short list. Let me point out, too, he's picked the perfect time. Right? If Jaron Ennis leaves the division, and there are times when it's involuntary, right? Your body says, hey, we can't make 147 anymore. Right? Eddie Hearn has talked about Jaron Ennis leaving the division, and keep in mind, Ennis, is the IBF champion, right? He wouldn't have a belt at 154, and that's a deep division. Are you certain that he can beat Boachuk, that he can beat Virgil Ortiz? Are you certain? I'm not. Right? 154 has some sleepers too. Right? Murtazaliev might be the best in the division. Right? Tim Tszyu showed a lot of hand speed that last fight, didn't he? Right? But Ennis might not be able to make 147 anymore. Take Ennis out of the equation and let's ask the question together. Who is the best at 147? Right? Is it Mario Barrios? That Abel Ramos fight ended in a split draw. Think about it. I don't see Mario Barrios calling out Abel Ramos, who would take the rematch in 1 second. Right? Brian Norman, promising young guy. Right? Young guy. Green. Right? Let's look at non-champions. Right? Devin Haney. Wow, when's the last time Devin Haney went blood and guts in the pocket? Folks, he couldn't take Ryan Garcia's punch. Now, granted, Garcia's a blessed puncher. At least a blessed left hooker. But couldn't take Ryan Garcia's punch at 143. Right? Would he be able to take punches at 147? Teofimo Lopez, I'll concede this on Teofimo. The way I view boxing, he's one of the best in the sport in the pocket. Right? Teofimo in the pocket is a handful. The problem is, when you're dealing with world-class fighters, they move. Right? Manny Pacquiao's not going to stand there in the pocket with you. Jared Ennis is not going to stand there in the pocket with you. Right? These guys are moving around. Lateral movement throws off Teofimo Lopez. Right? Would he be able to handle a Jared Ennis moving around the ring if you remove Ennis from the equation? Right? Is he able to handle a Manny Pacquiao? I'd take Pacquiao in that fight. Let's remember, Pacquiao beat Antonio Margarito. Right? Margarito, front foot heavy, hunter. Right? Wanted to engage from the opening bell. Pacquiao's movement dampened Margarito's volume. Dampened it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Keep an eye on 147. Folks, a lot is happening in that division. Also keep an eye at 154. Right? Keith Thurman's looking for a dance partner. Thurman today, in my opinion, is a future Hall of Famer. Just think of all the people he's fought. And the fact that the only guy he's lost to was Manny Pacquiao. And that fight's closer than you think. Thurman actually starts to come back in that fight. But Thurman was the only guy to get knocked down in that fight. And, of course, when you're fighting a legend and the guy knocks you down, right, as, you know, Jaime Munguia and Edgar Berlanga found out with Canelo, then you're up against it. It's uphill. Let me close by talking about Jaime Munguia. Right now, look, I don't know the lifestyle guys have been living. I don't know the boxing preparation protocol that guys have. But here's what we know. On a very high-profile card, Jaime Munguia, as of this video, has failed the A sample for his drug test. More importantly, he's fighting a guy who, granted, stopped him before, but only had a handful of stoppages. Right? Bruno Sirach. So you would have thought that if Munguia is as advertised, if he's the offensively blessed, heavy-handed, you know, blood and guts warrior that, you know, his image suggests, You thought Munguia would be in there ready to punish the guy who got a freak knockout of him. Right, folks? Pay attention to what's not happening. Right? Just like Benavidez hasn't stopped anyone at 175. In other words, this is the Mexican monster. That's the nickname Mike Tyson gave him. This is the Mexican monster who is not getting stoppages in his current division. Jaime Munguia in a rematch against a guy he should have been familiar with. Right? Did not get a stoppage. Now we're finding out that he also could not pass at least the A sample of his drug test. Let's keep an eye on the B sample. Munguia is not defensively blessed, right? He's not known for defense. If he's reached the part of his career where he can't aggressively pursue a guy with only 5 KOs and rough him up and land a lot of meaningful punches, he's in trouble. Because, of course, you fail a drug test, as Ryan Garcia knows, you're out for a year, right? At least 6 months, right? Now you're going to have guys looking at him thinking, wow, I thought this guy's calling card was offense. He couldn't knock out a guy with 5 knockouts, in 2 matches, right? Maybe now's the time for me to fight him. Let's also think of 168. You have a big fight coming up. It's big, right? You have Edgar Berlanga against Hamza Shiraz, right? Let's think about what happens if, particularly after that skull fight, if Crawford pulls the upset, right? Now, I think Canelo wins that fight. I think Canelo, particularly coming off of the skull fight, knows he's going to have to be more front foot heavy. I don't think Crawford, who granted is a different guy every fight, but I don't think Crawford can stay in the pocket against Canelo. I think Crawford has to necessarily be dancing and using lateral movement. So I think Canelo has to come out with the mindset he came out with against Jermell Charlo. Right? Look at that fight. Canelo's running up to Charlo. Gave Charlo no oxygen to breathe. Is in Charlo's face. Right? Let me say too, the boxing cognoscente realizes that Crawford is a great talent, right? He's unbeaten as I make this video, right? He is a great talent. The Errol Spence fight, I've never seen Spence, who was unbeaten going into that fight, get dominated like that, right? Spence dropped multiple times in that fight, right? Crawford's even dampened speed. Amir Khan, whatever you think of Amir Khan's chin, he had blinding hand speed. Blinding hand speed. And Crawford was able to get by him. Kell Brook, blinding hand speed. It's on display in the early part of his fight against Errol Spence. Right? He's much faster than Errol Spence. Crawford was able to dampen that hand speed. Right? Crawford's a great fighter. But life's unfair. Right? You understand, if I'm fighting an Ali, if I'm fighting a Pacquiao, if I'm fighting a Leonard, if I'm fighting a Joe Louis, if I'm fighting a Canelo, I enter the ring already down 2 rounds. Right? Already down 2 rounds. Now, a back foot's a curious thing. Right? People need to realize that Ali in the 60s, right, Mr. Backfoot, was stopping guys. Right? He was calling out rounds, and he was stopping guys. Sonny Liston never goes the distance with Ali. Right? Zora Fali doesn't go the distance with Ali. Cleveland Williams doesn't go the distance with Ali. Right? If you're on your back foot, understand it's a high wire act. You have to land shots that show the crowd that you're in a fight. Right? You have to be able to hurt the other guy. If you can't hurt the other guy and you're just outside shooting a jab, like Crawford was, we're being critical. I'll concede it. This is not a fan club site. While Crawford was against Madrimov. Right? Look at the CompuBox numbers on that fight. Right? He's not fighting Madrimov here. If he fights the Madrimov fight against Canelo, he loses. Let's be clear on that. Right? Just like William Skull lost. Canelo is the box office king here. I understand some young people, when Canelo fought Jaime Munguia, I was online, I was looking at the comments in real time on X, and it was shocking to me, right? Because Canelo is really a generational fighter. And in basketball, we're having an open conversation, NBA, on who's the face of the league, right? So you had some people say Anthony Edwards is the face of the league, right? This was before, of course, this last series. Charles Barkley, then said, hey, how can you call Anthony Edwards the face of the league when you have Joker and when you have SGA, right? Those guys should be the face of the league. In boxing, let's be real here. In boxing, I would say the face of boxing is either Canelo, or if you're into higher weights, Alexander Usyk. Right? Those are the guys who are iconic in the sport. Terence Crawford on his back foot, because in the pocket, let's face it, Crawford hasn't gotten a stoppage above 147. The Madrimov fight went the distance and, in my opinion, was close. Right? In my opinion, it's close. Right? That's 2 weight classes down. That's not 160. That's 154. Right? So I'm supposed to believe Crawford has gained weight. And what does that mean? He's going to get in the pocket against Canelo? No. Come on. By the way, let me say this too. I know you see the guys. And, they look like they're the same size. They're not. Right? Canelo has been fighting at 168. Canelo's been fighting some punchers. Right? Canelo fought Kovalev at 175. Right? So Canelo gets hit by a Crawford shot. Canelo will, in my opinion, have experienced that level of power before, because this is a guy who fought Golovkin 3 times. Right? This is a guy who fought Berlanga. This is a guy who fought Munguia. Right? So Canelo, I don't think Crawford's going to throw anything at Canelo that Canelo will not have already taken in the past. Let's ask a question here. How many times has Canelo been knocked down in his career? Tell us in the comment section of this video. Knowing that he fought Cotto. Knowing that he fought James Kirkland, who, by the way, Canelo says is one of the hardest guys punchers he's fought. Right? Given that Canelo has fought all the guys he's fought, how many times has he been knocked down? If you're fighting Canelo and you have no knockouts above 147, and you understand Canelo's the cash cow of the division, and you understand Canelo is defensively blessed, and, oh, by the way, he can take a punch, right? You're going to have to tell me what path Crawford has to win, short of looking like Ali did against Cleveland Williams. Right? I'll agree. If Crawford can be outside, can land some great shots, stagger Canelo, drop Canelo, like Manny Pacquiao, dropped Keith Thurman, right? That would be the kind of, oh my goodness, moment that could frame, attention on Crawford's boxing ability outside. Again, the fight I believe to look at is Crawford against Victor Postal. Right? Crawford, by the way, from the outside, drops Postal multiple times in that fight. Understand, the trainer in Postal's corner was Freddie Roach. Right? In other words, Postal, underrated fighter. Postal had one of boxing's best trainers in his corner. Crawford, from the outside, was able to drop Postal. Right? Fight goes the distance, but let's say you knew who was winning that fight. He needs that kind of performance here. The Postal fight didn't feature the weight gap that you have here. I know there's some fighters out there who are saying, hey man, Canelo's in trouble, Crawford, will outbox him. Just understand, boxing's rock, paper, scissors. You can outbox a guy and still lose because the other guy just hits too damn hard. Right? I watched several George Foreman fights where guys were outside and guys were hitting Foreman and guys were moving. Right? The bottom line is when Foreman hit you, guys staggered. Guys got dropped. Right? Crawford could make Canelo miss 9 times out of 10. If that 10th time staggers Crawford, has Crawford looking like Kovalev looked on some of the shots, right? You and I know there are rounds where a guy can look great for most of the round, then get hit with 1 or 2 haymakers. And you're thinking to yourself, man, who won that round? Right? Then you factor in the fact that Canelo is the incumbent, right? The whole purpose of this fight is Crawford going for a 3rd undisputed, which would give him 1 more than Alexander Usyk. Right? You and I understand that. I'm telling you, I'm one of those people, I'll raise my hand, who believes to take the title, you've got to beat the champ. Right? What that means is if I look at a fight and I say, man, did this guy eke out this win over the champ? Look, I'm not the person who is gonna view this as a horse race, who's gonna look at that final film and say, who hit the tape first? Right? No, I'm one of the people who believes that if I have to go to a who hit the tape first photo, the champ has defended his title. Right, so let's see what happens in that Crawford-Canelo fight. Let me say this too. That fight's going to reveal itself early. By the 4th round, either Crawford is being effective or he's not. Right, Canelo came across the ring on Jermell Charlo. By the way, Crawford had some post-fight comments about Jermell Charlo's style. Right, when Canelo comes across the ring, particularly after the skull fight, right, Canelo realizes, hey, foot speed has to be prioritized here. I can't leave anything to chance. Right, so if Canelo comes across the ring on Crawford, the question is going to be, what does Crawford have? Right? Ali was able to throw a stiff mobile jab on Sonny Liston. Right? Was able to control distance. Can you do that with Canelo, who knows how to crouch? Right? I want people to compare the Chris Eubank, Liam Smith fights with Canelo's fight against Liam Smith. Folks, Liam Smith's rough and tumble. We've all seen Liam Smith in fights where it's, hooks, elbows, forearms, right? He's rough and tumble. Canelo gets low, right? Canelo goes Joe Frazier on him. Canelo gets low. Canelo takes away his body, right? Takes away his body. Now, Crawford's a great body puncher. You saw that against Avanesian, right? He is a great body puncher. No question about it. Does his body punch translate at 168 pounds? If both guys are throwing body shots at each other, who's going to have the advantage? I think the guy who hits the hardest is Canelo, right? Let me also say, too, there's a risk going to the body on Canelo, because that Canelo left hook, in my opinion, is the best punch in that Canelo-Crawford fight, right? If Canelo lands it up top, again, I mentioned the Kovalev fight. Look at how Kovalev dealt with that left hook at the end of that fight. Folks, that's a potent punch, right? Crawford's never been knocked out. I have seen Crawford on the canvas, right? Ref missed it. Look at the Mean Machine fight. Mean Machine quietly is one of the better punchers in the sport, right? Look at the Mean Machine fight, right? Crawford gets hit, staggers for a second, goes down on the canvas, right? Size matters. You can be Henry Armstrong. You can be Usyk, right? In boxing, we've seen guys gain weight. Bernard Hopkins was not a light heavyweight. He was a middleweight. He's a Hall of Famer before he shows up at light heavyweight, quite frankly, right? Unofficial Hall of Famer. Obviously, there's a protocol. You have to wait a number of years. But Bernard Hopkins had a Hall of Fame career at middleweight. Then he goes to light heavy, and he's beating people like Jean Pascal, Antonio Tarver, right? I have seen guys gain weight. Manny Pacquiao, who we've mentioned here, right, gained weight. I remember I was watching a fight, Manny Pacquiao against David Diaz, the champ at 135, and you thought, wow, is Pacquiao biting off more than he can chew? And of course, that's before Pacquiao jumps to 147, beats De La Hoya, then jumps, granted it's a catch weight, but jumps to the 154-pound division and beats Antonio Margarito, right? I'm not saying it's not possible, right? I lived through Roy Jones, jumping to heavyweight, right? Roy Jones has an idol he followed, Bob Fitzsimmons, who, at different times was the middleweight champ, the light heavyweight champ, and the heavyweight champ. It's possible. I just think the idea of Crawford jumping up to 168 to fight Canelo and winning that fight's unlikely. We'll find out. Let me hear from you. Those are my thoughts today. I hope you leave yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.